Well, good morning to everyone. Please accept our apologies for starting late, but we promise you this will be a dynamic discussion in regards to the syphilis study in Tuskegee. This is very relevant given all that we've seen with COVID-19, and so we're just very thrilled to having our president's descendants of those men who were part of the syphilis study. My name is Melissa Bishop Murphy. I'm Senior Director of Government Relations for Pfizer. I'm so happy to be the Mistress of Ceremonies for this presentation today. But of course, our very esteemed President Mitchell will be asking all the tough questions, so we look forward to hearing from him. So why don't we get started? I'll start with introducing the panelists. First, we have President Billy Mitchell, President of NBCSL. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much.
As you all know, President Mitchell was elected to the Georgia General Assembly in 2002, and he began serving office in 2003, and he is currently chair of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. Ms. Lily Head. Ms. Head is president of Voices Our Fathers Legacy Foundation.
President.
And she's the daughter of Freddie Lee Tyson, who, again, was a victim of the syphilis study at Tuskegee. Next, we have Mayor Neal, former mayor of Tuskegee. He is the nephew of Freddie Lee Tyson, so I assume you guys are relatives. Wonderful. Next, we have Dr. Jonathan Edwards. Dr. Edwards is an internal medicine specialist. He has been a medicine specialist for more than 15 years. And last and certainly not least, Mr. Eric Patterson. Mr. Patterson.
How you doing?
Mr. Patterson is a veteran and also a descendant of a syphilis study victim. So before I turn it over to President Mitchell, I'm going to give each of you 3 to 5 minutes to talk about your experiences as a descendant of someone who was part of the syphilis study and the impact of that clinical trial. So Ms. Head, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Murphy. And acknowledging the dais up here, my fellow descendants, and along with President Mitchell, and all of you who are here to hear our story. Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I also like to add a few remarks about what Bishop Jackson said this morning about prayer and divine intervention. I must confess that had it not been for prayers and divine intervention, I would not be here as president of Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation, representing 623 beloved souls who were unethically treated in the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee and Macon County, Alabama. It will be in 2022, next year, 90 years since that study started in 1932 and lasted for 40 years. It will also be the 50th anniversary of the civil suit that was brought against the United States government for starting that study. It will be in 2022, 25 years since then President Clinton apologized nationally to the remaining or the living men of that study and that families in 1997. So you can see how after all of these years, the stories of those men are coming forth, as well as the relevancy of their but they're being victimized and how it can apply in some ways to the injustices that are being done today and that have been done for years since the early or mid 1600s to African American people. Voices for Our Fathers is all about transforming the legacy of the United States Public Health Syphilis Study from trauma and shame to honor and triumph. We should not be thinking that that should only be shame and trauma, but how we can learn from what has happened to our fathers and forefathers, and how we can make a difference now, and how we can make a difference for the future. The gentleman from Eli Lilly, and I don't remember.
Nate Miles.
Nate Howells mentioned.
Nate Miles.
Close enough.
Yeah, how he mentioned how we could gather together, and we are doing that. And then I think someone also mentioned about planting the seed for the trees for tomorrow that will bear a shade, and that's what we're doing. This is a season for us as a people, and hopefully Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation will be at the forefront of helping to change the way we think about participating in biomedical research, as well as fostering and promoting fair and equitable health care. So it's important that we do it. Now, a little bit about when we started. We started organized in 2014 at Tuskegee, as we had been celebrating for years the National Apology at Tuskegee University and the Bioethics Center. And I'm sure you will hear more about that later on with a couple of the guest speakers that will coming along. But the descendants found it necessary to tell the stories of their fathers, because the only thing that was out there was that they were used as guinea pigs, poor, uneducated, and injected with syphilis. They were not injected with syphilis. Although poor, they were rich with love, and they were rich in family. And that's important, and they provided. They were pillars in their community. But most of all, they were human beings, and they deserved better. We also wanted to tell how the story had impacted their family. Know this, that we and the families nor the men knew anything about the study until it was revealed in 1972 by a AP reporter, Mrs. Kelly. So we didn't know anything. So when you don't know anything, you don't know anything, and you can't react to it. So it's the after fact as to how we responded and reacted to the study. So we felt it was necessary to humanize our fathers and to put a face on those numbers that were there, as well as not be ashamed and to take that trauma and to move to do something good for everyone, and not to remain in that space where we are always being traumatized. So that's a little about—
Just a tease.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
about what we're doing. So thank you for the opportunity for sharing that.
Thank you. Mayor Neal?
Thank you so very much, Bishop Murphy, to our esteemed President Mitchell. It's an honor to be here today and to be on this dais with such great people. Interestingly enough, being the former mayor of Tuskegee, Alabama, I've always been very protective of how we present Tuskegee, and so I'm so glad my cousin said that it was the United States Public Health Service study conducted in Tuskegee, not the Tuskegee syphilis study.
That's right.
And I think it's important that we make that clear, because words do matter. And we have been told that there are many people who have decided not to get vaccinated for COVID-19 due to what they perceived as what happened at Tuskegee being the reason. And so we want to make it clear that what's happening with the COVID-19 vaccine is very different for what happened to our family members. Not only did my uncle, as my cousin Lily said, her father and my uncle was in the study, but we also had a great uncle, Rufus Neal, and his son, Reuben Neal, were also in the study. So I had 3 family members in that study. And I think that when it comes to really thinking about it, and it really brings me to a space of understanding that the men humanity was not recognized. And I think that's at the core of what we are dealing with even today, is that there is some hierarchy of humanity by which African Americans are at a lower level, and that there are people who are white at a higher level. In fact, when I was a little boy, we used to say, if you're white, you're right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. I remember that. And so the whole notion of humanity is at the core of this conversation. For the last, I guess, year, I've been working with the White House Shots at the Shop, moderating the town hall meetings to have the conversation on how to have the conversation in barbershops and hair salons with people of color particularly. And we find that many people are just confused about whether or not they should take the shot, and it's because of the not only misinformation, which is just spreading ignorance, but disinformation, intentionally misleading people. And so therefore, that's why we are here today to, one, humanize our relatives, to let you know that they were loved and that they were a part of our community, but more importantly, to make it clear that what is happening with the Tuskegee, with what's happened in Tuskegee by the United States Public Health Service is very different from COVID, in that in 1947, around about, penicillin was made available, and they did not give the men penicillin. They denied the men the drug. What's happening with COVID-19 is that the drug is being made available to anyone who wants it. That's the difference. So when you don't get vaccinated, you are technically doing to yourself what the government did to my ancestors.
Thank you, Mayor Neal.
Wow. Wonderful.
Dr. Edwards?
Good morning. My name is Jonathan Edwards, Dr. Jonathan Edwards. I'm an internal medicine physician in the state of North Carolina. Now I reside in Western North Carolina. I don't call it Asheville, but Western North Carolina. I am a descendant of one of the members of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
I think you're going to need the mic, because
His mic,
I don't think people are hearing you.
Mic not on.
Your mic is not on.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Is it on?
Just make
I
sure.
think I just needed to turn it on. It's amazing. Reading is fundamental. So, can you hear me now? Good. So, I think what we're doing with the 5 minutes. So, yeah, my mother's father, Gary Mitchell, a control in this study that was wrong. But when I received a text message from my mama I had to follow up on what she was asking me to do. She was asking me to contact Ms. Head, and that's what I had to do. So after I did that, I got in contact with Dr. Grant and some other folks, and I was given the task of at least preparing some remarks regarding a tragic piece of American history, the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, and COVID-19 vaccinations. The two should not be mentioned in the same sentence, period. They have nothing to do
But
with
they
each other.
often are.
Yes, and I think it boils down to trust. And
Right.
we'll get into that, but it all boils down to trust.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards.
De nada.
Mr. Patterson.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. When I think about the Tuskegee syphilis study, well, back up first. My name is Eric Patterson, born and raised Tuskegee, Alabama. You know, I graduated from Booker T. Washington High School, Tuskegee. And when I think about the syphilis study, you know, you can't grow up in Tuskegee without hearing about it and hearing about Black history as a whole. So when I think about it, it's like, we know it was wrong, but when you think about it, it's like I talked to Ms. Head this morning, it was kind of the perfect place to have the study. When you look at it, you had the university there, you had the nurses, and also, you know, syphilis at that time was an epidemic in that area, and then pretty much all over the country. And you had Black men that, you know, were working in the cotton fields, sharecropping and doing manual labor, and they didn't have, you know, the education that we have today. So they really didn't understand what was going on. And they was told that they had, you know, bad blood, as we all know. So when you think about that, and I think it, you know, it was just a disjustice, because you had people there that actually knew what was going on, and then when penicillin came around, you know, they didn't, you know, give it to them. They just, you know, studied those people for, you know, from like, what, 1932 to 1972. So when you think about that, and think about all the other stuff that, you know, was going on in, you know, rural towns, like just like Tuskegee in the South, you know, I feel like it was very wrong. But taking a look at COVID-19 today, and, you know, I've been vaccinated, you know, most of my family have, and I try to tell everybody to go get vaccinated, because it's not just a rural problem that's going on in the South, it's a national problem and it's a global problem. And when you think about that, you know, we have the capabilities now, you know, we have, you know, a lot of people that are educated, and we know how to deal with it. So, you know, not, you know, getting vaccinated would be just like, you know, saying, okay, we accept the syphilis study and we haven't learned from the past. So that's why myself, with my social media YouTube channel, Eric Patterson YouTube channel, I try to convey that message to let people know that they should go get vaccinated, and you should take somebody with you as well. Okay. Thank you.
Well, good to be here with you all. And I will start off by saying, you all seem to be suggesting that the vaccination is important. And having gone through this experience, I'll tell you the number one reason why I, particularly among African Americans, they distrust the present day vaccination processes, because they distrust the governmental entity. And Mayor Neal, you hit it on the head. I'm going to start referring to the study as the U.S. Public Health Services Syphilis Study instead of the Tuskegee Experiment or the Tuskegee, and I'm glad that you brought that to our attention. But my question is, give me your brief reasons why you feel today that vaccinations are important. Why do you feel that they are important? You know, the heart of my question is, you know, before I was an elected official, was on the other side of government, I had a tremendous trust of our government and their laws. But I will tell you, being on this side of the process, you know, the law truly is like sausage. If you want to appreciate it, you probably ought not see how it's made, But the reality is, we are where we are. There's so much dysfunction and incompetency and, quite frankly, dishonesty. Why do you still feel that vaccination is important, given all of that? Let me start with you, Mrs. Head.
History. History tells me that the vaccination is important. All of my life, and I'm sure most of everyone who's here, we've had vaccines. Since our births, we've had vaccines, and we know what vaccines can do to help to eradicate and to control diseases. So that part of history tells me. My faith also tells me we have to, and I think this was mentioned this morning too, we have to do our part. And the vaccines were here, and they were made by competent people. And thank God we had some of representation from our community who spearheaded some of the vaccines. I think it was with the Moderna vaccine. So that's important. So we see what vaccines can do. And of course, there are sometimes hiccups, and there's sometimes some tragedies that might come out of that, because everybody's body is different. So history tells me that. I'm also a believer in science. And then, as Omar has mentioned, the men were denied the opportunity of being healed, and we will be denying ourselves of that. So I was ready and anxious to get vaccinated when I learned that there was one available, and I was thankful that my husband and I could go ahead and get the vaccine. So I'm looking forward to the future, but trust is also a big part of that. And I realize and understand the lack of trust. But you have to have trustworthiness in that. And that's part of the Foundation's mission too, is to help to build a bridge that will carry us from mistrust to trust, and it being based on trustworthiness. So we hopefully will be working more and more with different medical fields and research and so forth to help to build that trust. So it's important.
May I add that when it came to the COVID-19 vaccines, it was very important for all of the companies who are developing a COVID-19 vaccine that there was representation from those who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. So you saw with the clinical trials that there were African Americans, Hispanics, Asians in the clinical trials that were reflective of the population of the United States. So it was, and that didn't happen by happenstance. It was through partnerships. Mr. Patterson was talking about his social media. It was through those types of partnerships
I think you need
that we were
microphone.
able to. Thank you.
It's on.
It was through those types of partnerships that we were able to make sure that the clinical trials were diverse. Thank you.
Let me go to you, Mayor Neal. Why do you believe vaccination, being at the tragedy that you have happened, your nephew was in the U.S. Public Health Services syphilis study. Why do you still believe vaccinations are important?
You know, somebody said something to me, that's a good question, Mr. President. Somebody said something to me that made all of the sense in the world just recently when I was conducting a town hall meeting. They said only two things really saved the human race. And you know, it really perked my ears up when I heard that. He said the first was the purification of water, and the next thing was vaccinations.
Wow.
The only reason why we're here today, let me be clear, is because of vaccinations. All of my life, as my cousin said, we were vaccinated in order to go to school.
That's true.
It is the politicization of the vaccination. That's the problem.
Wow.
And until we are able to move beyond this notion that somehow I need to have some allegiance by putting myself in jeopardy, playing Russian roulette with my life to show you that I am with you, we will continue to be in this spiral. You know, the other thing, and I think it's important that I say this quickly, is that when viruses mutate and create different variants, they can literally create a variant that can elude my protection. So when I'm promoting vaccines, I'm promoting my protection. I'm trying to stay alive. I want my children, my child to stay alive, my family to stay alive. I want each of you to stay alive. And the only way we can stay alive collectively is that we all are vaccinated. And that's where we are today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Edwards, internal medicine specialist, give us your perspective on the importance of vaccination.
I'm very cautious when I speak about the vaccine. And as I was speaking with some folks today in the warm-up room, I guess, for the speakers, you really don't want to hear what I think. You don't really want to hear what anyone thinks, because there's science. You know, there is science to this vaccination. It's the job of the NIH. And I say them first because the CDC was that public health service. Yeah. It's the job of the NIH and the CDC to protect the health of the United States. The science points to the fact that when you have the vaccine, you begin to create herd immunity and you begin to move beyond this pandemic. So I point to those organizations that are given the responsibility for keeping us healthy and alive. National Institutes of Health first, CDC second.
Wow, wow. Brother Patterson, you have you're a descendant of a syphilis study victim.
Yes, sir.
How did your family feel about the importance of vaccination?
Well, when we look at it, you know, we've always had, you know, vaccinations, just like, you know, we talked about even when polio was prevalent in little kids years ago. So, you know, even when COVID-19 is gone, I'm sure there's going to be something later on that we're going to have to get, you know, vaccinated for, you know, like what happened to my grandfather, you know, with the syphilis study, you know, that's in the past. You know, we'll never forget that. And, you know, those men, you know, they were respectable people, hardworking people. But now, since, you know, you have the technology, you have, you know, scientists, and like we said before, you know, this is a global issue. It's not just affecting a minority of people. So myself and my family look at it as, you know, it's a good thing that we have, you know, the capability to get vaccinated, you know, to protect ourselves and, you know, to protect everybody around us. We look at it as if you do not get, you know, vaccinated, you're doing yourself, you know, a disservice, as well as, you know, those who passed from syphilis, you know, years ago.
You know, you seem to really have overcome what I view as a tragic, you know, just ghastly what they've done to your family members. Let me ask you, what did you learn from that experience? Your family had to go through that. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, one thing, Mr. President, is that in all things there's a blessing and a lesson. In all things. And so instead of, dwelling on what happened, there's nothing we can do about that. But certainly we can learn from it. One is the Institutional Review Board came out of that study.
Is that our time?
And so therefore, the whole construct of how clinical trials are done came out of that study. Never would, we don't know what it would have happened historically, but we do know that that study reshaped. Am I good?
Check your mic.
I'm good now. All right. What we do know is that that study reshaped how we deal with clinical trials and human subjects. So as a result, something came out of that good. Now, the other thing is, too, we understand that trust is a calculated risk. And I think sometimes we forget that a lot of times people are not really focusing on what's happening historically. They're focusing on how they're being treated when they go to the hospital today.
Right.
And I think we place too much emphasis on what happens historically when we don't look at the same things that happen historically are happening contemporarily. And the other thing is, and I hearken back to the point of humanity and this notion that somehow black people are less than other people. And until we deal with the notion of white superiority and its evil twin, black inferiority, we will continue to have this conversation.
In addition to the Institutional Review Board, which oversees all biomedical research during this time, the informed consent also came from that. That was the National Research Act that was passed in 1974 as a result of that study also. And from that, different things have sprung from it. The informed consent also came from that and was strengthened during that time. But I'd like to say a few words about the informed consent part. We know now that when we go to the doctor, anytime that you have a medical procedure, they give you a form to fill out, giving them permission to do whatever it is that they're going to do to you, or to even to examine you. Well, that's very important, and I would encourage everyone to read it carefully and understand what is being done. Because what I am learning and feel it's happening is that you sign that form, but you don't know really what it entails and what is happening. I say that to say this: there are still unknowns about what happened to the specimens that were taken from the men. The main purpose of that study was to follow those men untreated with syphilis until their death, so that they could be autopsies. We still don't know, and when I say we, the descendants still do not know how those specimens were used and what became of the specimens. We're still looking for that answer. In addition to the tests that were given, the blood tests that were received for over 40 years. And you know, when you get a blood test, you usually find out what happened and what has been determined from that blood test. We still don't know any of that information. That's another mission of the foundation. So when we sign that consent form, make sure that we are informed clearly and we understand what is being done and how whatever is being done will be used. So I would like to just caution each of us about that.
And also, let me say this, Lily, not one person was held accountable for what they did for that 40 years. Not one person was fired, demoted, or any other consequence to people who were a part of that study. And until there is accountability, futuristically, obviously, we will continue to find ourselves in this quandary. And so I think it's important that we note that it's important to be transparent. And let me just say one more thing as I end up. I don't like to use the word herd immunity. I like community immunity. Because words count.
As you mentioned.
Let's just say community immunity. Let us save, protect each other and save each other. Let's talk from that vantage point.
Amen, amen. Dr. Edwards, how can we build the kind of trust that we need to really take advantage of what being properly vaccinated has to offer?
Well, trust takes time, and trust requires one to listen. And you're not going to hear anything unless you give someone a platform to speak, and if you're not going to hear anything if someone doesn't feel like they're being heard. So you really have to listen to both sides. You have to listen to those folks who do not want to receive a vaccine. And you need to listen to folks who would like to be vaccinated and would like for other folks to be vaccinated. I've just taken a stance that if someone was dead set and adamant about not getting the vaccine, you can't hold anyone down and inject them with a vaccine. What you don't want to do is, give someone a reason to blame everything on. Oh, my toe hurts. I told you I shouldn't have got that vaccine. It has nothing to do with it. So, so in order to build trust, it's going to require my profession, my industry, to listen to folks and to work at it on a consistent basis. And then there also has to be the accountability of those organizations that have been given the task to keep us healthy.
Wow.
So there needs to continually be studies on folks who have received the vaccines, folks who have not received the vaccines, and what it is meaning to various communities, because it is a community immunity we're at. I like that. I put it on a t-shirt.
Dr. Edwards, Melissa Bishop Murphy is jumping out of a chair, but that's an interesting perspective you have. Patient comes to you. I'm reluctant to take this vaccination. Your approach is let me give you an example. Went to my doctor when I was 45, and she says, I think it's about time that you have a colon test. I gave her every excuse. I have a female doctor. I gave her every excuse why I should not do this at this time. I was not prepared for this. I don't think I'll be okay. She would not let me leave. She said, you are not going to leave here to do that. I said, now, I think I need a male doctor. I said, male doctors' hands are much bigger than mine. Turn around. And,
That was a prostate exam.
I'm sorry, prostate exam. Some of you know what I'm talking about. In any event, The point was, she would not let me leave until I took a test that she felt was in the best interest of my health.
Right.
Is your position, if they come to the position, you let them leave?
Well, the bottom line is what I do for a living, the practice of medicine is an art and a science. So during my formal years at the Ohio State University, we got the smackdown by Michigan over the weekend, but there was never anything that I saw that says you need this much art, this much science. So you really have to present the science to who you're speaking to and let them know, like, here's the science. And here's the science that's coming from NIH and CDC regarding the vaccine. And then your art is to talk to them and to understand what their concerns are, understand why there is a distrust. And folks are going to have different reasons to not trust. And you work from there. And unless you do that, oftentimes you're not going to be successful.
Trust is a calculated risk, right?
Melissa Bishop Murphy, what's your perspective?
Mayor Neal, I don't want to stop your flow of
No, I'm just
your
saying,
thought.
you make your friends before you need them,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
We need to have relationships with people. So it's not just the message, it's the messenger. Right? And if you've not had a relationship with me before you stop now telling me to do something to which I don't have a clear understanding as to its harm or benefit, right? Then there's going to be hesitancy. And so what we have to do is we have to educate the population in a way that they feel comfortable. And the other thing that we need to do, we got too many people who've been vaccinated or closet vaccinated people. You need to promote your protection. I've been vaccinated 3 times, 2 and a booster, right? And I'm fine,
Same
right,
here.
with that, right? And we need to be able to tell that story. That's part of the problem. We got too many people who have just me, my foe, and no more, right? It's all I'm thinking about. No, you got to think about everybody. Promote your protection.
And I like to say to just have that caring and empathetic compassion when you're doing it. And as Dr. Edwards said, you have to have an understanding for the differences of opinion, and then try to work from and try to work from that level. That's so very important.
And I would like to add, one of the issues that we at Pfizer saw was that I mentioned that we wanted to make sure that our clinical trials were diverse because of the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on multicultural populations. So we went to what we have in Pfizer is the Multicultural Health Equity Collective, which I co-lead. To your point, Mayor Neal, those relationships, the collective is a group of concerned Pfizer employees who are very concerned about reducing healthcare disparities in communities of color. And that organization has been around over 8 years, working with over 40 plus multicultural organizations like NBCSL, National Urban League, NAACP, National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. So we have, to your point, Dr. Edwards, built those relationships before we needed them in this instance of COVID-19. So when COVID-19 happened and we wanted to engage the multicultural community, we went to those trusted sources in the community to share the information about where the clinical trial sites. We heard from them telling us in terms of what types of materials should be provided so that those communities could understand the information about the clinical trials. So it was a back and forth throughout the clinical trial process, which continues to this day because I think people forget the COVID-19 clinical trial is still ongoing. It's a multi-year clinical trial. So even though we have emergency use authorization and we have full authorization for our COVID-19 vaccine for those 18 years of age and older, it is an ongoing dialogue. And we hear from I have to tell you, NBCSL and Joe Grant were one of the main people who were saying, tell me about your institutional review boards. Who's on the institutional review board? So NBCSL was active in discussing and understanding how Pfizer was doing its COVID-19 clinical trial, so that when the vaccine did come out, we had the information that could be shared with the legislators, who then shared it with their constituents. So without that trust that had been built over many years prior to the COVID-19 clinical trial, I do not think that we would have been as successful as we've been in getting the information out to multicultural communities. So you hit the nail on the head, Mayor Neal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just say this. Many of us here, most of us here, in fact, are policymakers, legislators. What can we do to make certain that a U.S. Public Health Services syphilis study never happens again? Are there sufficient safeguards so that we can feel confident going forward in recommending vaccinations?
You know, it's a process, you know, and at every level we need to have accountability, transparency. It's critically important. We cannot, this cannot be an esoteric conversation. We got to be able to talk to people, and as we say in Tuskegee, put it where the cows can get it, right? Talk to people where they understand what you're talking about. Use language that people understand. The other thing is that now it's getting to the point we need to get granular and begin to even go into the families. Let the family have a conversation about us being vaccinated so that we will have family reunions, not funerals, right? Because now the family reunion is a funeral. And we've had so many people who've died of COVID, over 770, maybe 80, I don't even know the number now. Those are individuals who are now can testify and can say this is real. And the last thing that we're doing now with the National Funeral Home Directors and Morticians Association, we're now going to have vaccine clinics or vaccines at funeral services. Yeah, y'all can clap for that one. You know, and it's a request of the family, right? So we're not imposing. A request form will come from the family that we'll have the vaccines available out here in a mobile unit for those people, because a lot of times the people who died admonished their family members to get vaccinated, and then now we have to make it available to them at that moment, right? We cannot wait, and we have to think out of the box. In fact, let's throw the box away.
Right.
So, but I
ahead,
heard a question on
go ahead,
the
Dr.
floor
Edwards. Go ahead.
regarding like how do we not have such a tragic, you know, study repeat itself. For one, it has repeated itself since the Tuskegee, since the United
States
Public Health Service
The syphilis study.
in Tuskegee.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful. That's one, but it's, you know, it's, what do they call it? Institutionalized racism. Like if you start with a premise, if you start with a racial premise in anything, banking, medicine, law, then you oftentimes are going to have the fuel for such a study. So I always ask myself, you know, if everything has a mathematical solution, what's the mathematical solution for hate? You know, which is kind of where something like this comes from, because you have a preconceived notion from an ill-conceived principle, which was that black men were somehow less than any other man. So, yeah, that's a tough one.
But I would add, though, that every clinical trial has an institutional review board. Every clinical trial since the unfortunate syphilis study. So an institutional review board has a number of people in it, and one of the persons that is part of the institutional review board is a community-based person. So thank you to the descendants who champion these safeguards in clinical trials, because I think that is one of the main reasons you will not see a syphilis-like incident again, is because we have those safeguards that were championed by the descendants of the syphilis study, and that safeguard includes an institutional review board, and as you said, Ms. Head, this whole issue of informed consent. So whenever you're going in for a procedure, whenever you're there, you have to sign, read the information, you have to be presented with the information, and you have to acknowledge and do that consent form. So those were the safeguards that were put in so that we would never see anything like the syphilis study again.
Yeah, very
Your
quickly.
question was, what can the lawmakers do now? What can you do now? And I would like to say, continue to do what you're doing. Be able to identify racism wherever you see it, and be able to call it out. And also look for the disparities that you see in the healthcare policies that are being brought forth, and in education, because education is important. If the community is not educated, then it's going to be difficult for them to understand anything that's coming down. So I would say continue to look for racism in any form, and to call it out and try and change it, and look for the disparities that are in healthcare. That is so important. Does that gentleman have a hand up?
We're going to go to questions in a moment.
Yeah.
Let me just say this before we go on to our questions. I foresee some legislative solutions, and as we go to questions, I'd love to hear your feedback on that. For instance, the notion that you can't get the results of the testing and what they did with that can be a legislative fix. We can pass laws in our states and certainly in our federal level to provide you that access. I want to know if your family members have been compensated for the unjust treatment that they have by the government. That is a legislative fix that can be done. And there are probably other legislative and policies that we can implement as well, because I think your family should be very well compensated as a result of that. Listen, Bishop Murphy, our first questioner.
Yeah.
Lucas from Senator Lucas from Georgia. First of all, I applaud you for coming on stage. I went to Tuskegee,
Oh, good. So did I.
and I was told about the Tuskegee Experiment. I was told that they were given syphilis, nurses aided, knew what was going on, and nobody would help them. Listen, I'm in the street, clubs, I do shows. Everybody talk about the Tuskegee Experiment, that these folks have made a drug and now we're supposed to take it. You know what happened in Tuskegee? Tuskegee story needs to be told. There was a drug to cure it, and they did not get the drug. And so that story needs to go here for. But black folks all around the country have a problem with the vaccination. And I'm talking about young folks have a problem with it because of the so-called Tuskegee Experiment. Your story needs to get out to the public. That's part of the problem. I had COVID and couldn't wait till I got the shot. But I'm telling you, that is the problem.
Anyone wants to address that?
Let me say one thing, and I agree with you. But I think that, you know, as we talk to legislators, and I'm so happy to be here, we need to understand racism in a more in-depth way, not interpersonal, but institutional, in how it manifests itself. Because if you don't understand racism, then anything else you think you understand will only serve to confuse you. And so it's important that we do that, but more importantly, we need to make sure that we have our people educated so that they can make informed decisions. And that's our work, and that's why we're here, to tell people the truth about what happened at Tuskegee.
That education that he speaks of it's so very crucial, and a large part of it is, and especially with the young folks, there's not an understanding of the basic science. So if you talk about like what a virus is versus a bacterium versus a fungus versus a protozoan, people have no concept. And then there are a lot of mistruths that are being spread via various social platforms. So if you're going to make a dent, one, you got to get to the youth, and it's so very important that they listen to us, but it is so very important that we listen to them. They're not going to have anything to say unless you give them a platform to start speaking. So, they're ruminating on a lot of non-truths that, is oftentimes flashed before them on a small electronic device.
May I address that gentleman's
Yeah,
comment?
quickly.
To the gentleman that said we need to tell our story. Sir, that's what we've been trying to do as a foundation for the past 18 months. And we're,
It's got to be publicly known.
I'm
telling you, people out in the street talk about the Tuskegee
Right.
Absolutely, and we have been working on that, so at any opportunity where you see we can speak and we can come, we'd be more than happy to be there.
Right.
But we have been on national TV, international interviews, newspapers, Dr. Oz show. We really have been, working hard, but I understand we're not doing enough. And we really need to do more, and we need to change who is accountable, who's responsible, and who owns that study. And that's the United States Public Health Service syphilis study at Tuskegee, and I include Macon County, because Macon County was the community where those men came from in rural Macon County. They were the uneducated ones, and that community was highly impacted. So that's important. There's a lot to it that we're working to do, and we welcome anyone to join our foundation. You can go online to www.Voices for Fathers, and you can join us, and we welcome you, and we also welcome your input and your activity. So we want to do that.
I just want to say one thing.
Watch the time.
One is 7. A person needs to have 7 impressions 7 times before they even know they heard it.
Exactly.
We need to say it repeatedly, right? So people may have heard it, but we need to do it. We need to be more robust.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Right, in getting the message out. So you are absolutely right, sir.
Next question.
Good.
Be conscious of it.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the family of the Tuskegee victims.
United States Public Health Service.
I'm gonna say victims. I'm gonna say victims. I'm saying victims in the terms of the ma'afa of black people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me just also say a disclaimer. My name is Representative Carol Ammons. I'm from Illinois, and I'm at the University of Illinois. And so the reason why that is important is because the research institutions also play a role in the
Absolutely.
exploitation of black people in all of these medical experiments, and Tuskegee is not alone.
That's right.
We have an entire plethora of research
That's right.
of medical apartheid against black people, so we should not leave out of the story why black people are so hesitant on vaccines, and I'm vaccinated. But I had to call a friend, of a doctor, of a psychiatrist, of a researcher, for me to even decide to take the vaccination. because the Congress indemnifies the pharmaceutical companies when they roll out these things. And because of that, we have a long history that's documented in Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case of companies who are not doing by the citizens what's supposed to be done. And so we do have a real hurdle, but not talking about it certainly will not get us to the next level. And then lastly, Mr. President, I think it is important for NBCSL, and I've been a member for the last 7 years, for us to really grapple with the topics that we really don't want to talk about. Because for us and our communities, whether you vaccinated or not, poor health care is what we've been receiving for generation after generation. When the HIV/AIDS epidemic happened, what did the response be? The response was to incarcerate black people, largely black males, not a public health response to HIV. And so we have kind of not really dealt with it, even though we know there was a medicine that could help those black men at that time too, but they didn't do it. So we got a little bit more we need to do on this topic for sure, and I thank you all for coming and sharing your story.
Yeah.
Let me say one thing.
You got the time down.
Yeah, we got the time down.
Okay. Let me just say to her question, Representative Ammons, one of the things that we, as a result of my presidency, is we were going to deal with some very tough issues, some issues that traditionally we as urban legislators don't like to grapple with. And certainly this is an issue that our folk need to hear about, because if we can get better informed on this issue, we can definitely better serve the community. So your point is well taken, and let's go. We've got time for a few more questions, and let me just say to you that following this is lunch, and
That'll get us out early, Mr. President.
yeah, so we're going to get through.
I thought you had forgotten that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President, and let me thank the facilitator who for so long served Georgia so well. Melissa, good to see you. And relationships, and the mayor spoke about that. When I went to get my vaccine, I just wanted the one, and I told him I want the one that Melissa Bishop Murphy is. They know what I was talking about, but I know Pfizer because I know her. I don't even have a doctor anymore that I can't call by my first name, by his first name. Because if we ain't got enough relationship for me to call you anything but doctor, I need another doctor who can call me Al and I can call him Clint. I build a relationship like that. Titles turn me off significantly. The bishop this morning hit it, and I've heard it, it's been bounced around, and we deny it because we're in the business. But he hit it this morning. Our problem is messaging. And my contention is the social media part of this, very limited what it's done to Big Mama. Because the devils that he talked about this morning, evangelicals on Sunday morning and all week long, that Big Mama and Papa is listening to is where that false information is coming from.
That's right.
It's coming from them fake preachers like Paula White who use up black folk and ride in jets, and some pimping black preachers that don't care nothing about us and scared to mention getting a vaccine from the pulpit. But please, whatever you do, I represent a rural district, and that's probably less than 10% of you here. And I'm not saying because of the lines, I represent a city and a piece of a country. All of my district is country. And so, Mr. Mayor, I've enjoyed you so much, but my folk ain't gonna remember that long new name for the Tuskegee Experiment. I can't tell them about Tuskegee and go through all that. They don't know who I'm talking about. You took it from the goats and gave it to the giraffes. No, I gotta talk to folk where they are. And I gotta explain to them, and between that, you all keep the fight going. because not enough people know. In my district, I have the largest military installation east of Mississippi in my district. And if I ask 25 folk about the Tuskegee Experiment, only about 4 or 5 of them will know. That's not why they're not taking shots. It's them fake preachers that's killing us and preaching all week and taking the little money Big Mama had to buy some gas to go get a shot in the mail. Y'all keep it down on the real. Don't change the name of that experiment. Big Mama be totally lost.
We can't do that.
Okay. All right. That was profound. Let's get to one more question because they are asking me to go to lunch. One more question. The microphone is where?
My representative is over there. My representative is there, Representative Pebblin Warren. She represents my district where I am.
We may have to
No, she's over there.
quickly.
Hello.
And your question is?
Okay.
Oh, yep, very quick. So my question would be a little different from the last few, but addressing clinical trial barriers, specifically with the experiment that happened in Tuskegee, what went wrong was a lack of treatment and a lack of education. And a lot of concerns that are presented in the public health space is a concern for potential infection, but also a disregard for competing demands, like whether or not you have something to pay for, if you have time to do certain things. And so my question was, when addressing these factors, like treatment, which penicillin is, versus prevention, like a vaccination, how do you address the barriers and the competing demands in the communities that you serve and are talking to on a day-to-day basis?
Who wants to take that quickly?
One
person.
I'll take it.
Well, one is, I think that anyone who's conducting clinical trials should make sure that people are compensated, not to the point of coercion, but compensated so that that those barriers don't exist. We have to be intentional about including people, particularly those people who have been historically excluded. And so I think it behooves and it's incumbent upon the people who are doing clinical trials to make sure that people are properly positioned to be a part of those trials.
So there's a piece of legislation in Congress now that speaks to that issue as well. Pfizer personally has made a decision to make sure that our clinical trials are diverse and be reflective of the census. So, depending on if it's 12% African Americans, at least 12% are the clinical trial must have 12% African Americans in it. One of the other things we're doing is making sure that the clinical trials go into the communities. This whole issue of transportation was a big deal. And so we found from the COVID-19 clinical trial, having the clinical trial in the African American community was key to making sure that we had the follow-up. We're also compensating for transportation, childcare, and the like. So a number of changes are being made not only by Pfizer, but other companies as a result of the learnings from the COVID-19 clinical trial that will help make sure that clinical trials going forward are diverse.
Great. Last question.
Yes.
Since you are the mayor's
Representative, absolutely. We got to let her say something.
Go right ahead. Stand, identify yourself, and ask your question.
I'm Pebblin Warren, District 82 in Alabama, which is was the home of Tuskegee. Okay. I've heard a lot here today, and a lot's been said that's educational to everybody. But when we start hearing our people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to take this shot because that's the white man trying to get us again because of the syphilis study," it's totally false. Everybody who attended to the syphilis study patients were black. Black doctors, black nurses.
Is that right?
Yes.
No,
they were white doctors.
Yeah, the United States Public Health Service.
But the work that was done in Tuskegee was, I can't name the doctor and the nurse.
Yeah, that's true.
But it was done by black people to black people. So as we start trying to educate people on this,
They knew
we
about
got
it.
to
I did not
really
know that.
stay in line with the medical processes and not the people are doing it to us. As it relates to the compensation part, there was a lawsuit filed by attorney Fred Gray, who we honored the year we were in Jacksonville. And the lead plaintiff in that case was my husband's grandfather, Charlie Pollard. They were compensated. The compensations have already been made to those who were living or their families. They did get a compensation as a result. So it's a situation that we got to continuously
Wasn't
work
compensated
on
enough for what they
and
went through.
educate our people as to the true need and the purpose of having and taking their vaccinations. Thank you.
Well, let me just say this. I got the sense that Representative Warren had a lot more to say about that, and she is going to be one of the speakers at our lunch, and we can get a lot more about that there. Certainly give her a hand. I want to say, give a particular round of applause to Melissa Bishop Murphy and Pfizer. Pfizer did have a black physician that helped devise their vaccine, Dr. Kismikia Corbett. The Moderna, and so that was the Moderna vaccine was developed in part. But please help me give a round of applause to Ms. Lily Head, Mayor Omar Neal, Dr. Jonathan Edwards, and Mr. Eric Patterson, extraordinary panelists. Some of you had more questions to ask, I'm sure, on the way out to lunch. They would not mind that you come up to them, but let me advise you to go over to the next room. We had breakfast. They are preparing for you to have our lunch. Thank you so very much. This has been extraordinary.